Some original character designs looked like they'd work. Some others were bananas, kinda literally. Let us know which you like best, but it's certainly not this first one. Would Predator be considered such a classic today if the Predator in question looked like this? Well, probably not, but that's almost what we got back in 1987.
And we all looked at each other and said, "Oh, are we in trouble?"
Initially, none other than Jean-Claude Van Damme was cast to play the Predator. The costume intended for Van Damme was lankier than the finished product though, requiring leg extensions and an additional leg joint. This looked good in mock-ups, but made it almost impossible for Van Damme to do any kind of expressive acting. It was also difficult to move around in, especially in a challenging environment like the jungle where much of the movie was filmed on location. Van Damme, who had originally believed he would get the chance to show off his killer moves, found himself unable to do anything much at all. He ended up walking away from the project, and production came to a halt so a new design could be made. For this task, the crew brought in legendary special effects artist Stan Winston. Winston took a different approach to the creature's design, factoring in the environment they'd be shooting in as well as the physicality of its new performer, Kevin Peter Hall. The pressure was on, as every day marked a costly delay for production. Yet Winston and his team pulled it off, the film got back on track, and the Predator itself soon earned its well-deserved place in pop culture history. Bob Kane and Bill Finger have long been recognized as the creators of Batman, but an artist named Frank D. Foster II once insisted that he was the man who invented the Caped Crusader. Speaking to an attorney in 1975, Foster revealed the source of his inspiration. He said, "In those days, and even now, most of the strips were the heroes of the day, flying through the sky during the day and doing good deeds and so forth and so on. And I thought, well, why couldn't that be done at night? Have a good guy do stuff at night." Foster claimed he drew up the first concepts for Batman in 1932. He attended a few meetings with DC Comics in 1937 to discuss his ideas, after which he left his original drawings with the company. According to Foster, DC returned the drawings to him, saying they had decided not to use his work, yet the Batman made his comic book debut in 1939's Detective Comics number 27. Foster said that he never sued DC because he didn't have the means. He died in 1995, although his family still hosts his drawings on originalbatman.com. And to be honest, the original artwork is kinda cool. Throw some gray on that suit and you can see it works. Plus, no capes. In the mid-1970s, George Lucas hired renowned artist Ralph McQuarrie to conceptualize the ideas he had come up with for his new science fiction movie. Designing everything from planets to spaceships to the characters themselves, McQuarrie's illustrations have since become some of the most famous in Hollywood history. But while many of them made it to the screen, others were discarded along the way.
I have a very bad feeling about this.
Take, for example, the original design for Chewbacca. To say that McQuarrie's first go at Chewbacca isn't quite so lovable as the final concept might be something of an understatement. He looks more frightening than anything else with those odd proportions and an almost lemur-like quality. Lucas himself had also imagined a different appearance for Han Solo, initially describing him as a green, slime-covered alien called a Urelian. And while neither design was used in 1977 Star Wars, both have since been featured in the franchise. The original Han appears in the comic series, The Star Wars, which is based on Lucas's early drafts, while McQuarrie's Chewie design helped inspire the look of the Star Wars Rebels character Zeb. Since Alien is as much a horror movie as it is a work of sci-fi, the Xenomorph doesn't take up too much screen time. Nevertheless, the filmmakers knew that the project would live or die based on the success of the monster's design.
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
The crew worked through several unusual concepts for the Xenomorph in the weeks before H.R. Giger joined the production. Some of these were decent, and others were pretty ludicrous. Not to be too judgy, but sometimes trying to find that perfect design gets askew. But the worst of them all came from the mind of Robert Aldrich, who had been tapped to direct the movie long before Ridley Scott came on board. In an interview with Mark Maron, producer Walter Hill recalled what Aldrich told him during one of their discussions about the Xenomorph's design.
You know, maybe we could get like an orangutan and shave it. And we go, God almighty.
Fortunately, this idea never gained traction. Soon after, Giger came in and devised one of cinema's greatest monsters. Even he went through a few different concepts though before settling on the final design. The Star Wars saga features some of sci-fi's most recognizable character designs, including Darth Maul, who was played by Ray Park in 1999's The Phantom Menace.
At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last we will have revenge.
Even in the Star Wars universe, few villains are quite so memorable as Maul, which makes it easy to forget that he almost looked much different. During pre-production on The Phantom Menace, George Lucas worked with concept artist Ian McCaig to flesh out the character's look. He provided McCaig with the script, which called for a vision from your worst nightmare. And that's exactly what McCaig came up with. When he presented his original design for Darth Maul to the director, a visibly disturbed Lucas slammed the book shut. He told McCaig, "Give me your second worst nightmare." McCaig's version might have worked wonders on the screen, although there's also a good chance it would have traumatized an entire generation. As it turned out, his second attempt gave us the Maul we know and love, a design so popular with fans that Maul has returned to the franchise again and again in the years since. E.T. the Extraterrestrial is considered a beloved family classic today, but it didn't start out that way. Initially, director Steven Spielberg wanted to make a sequel to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and he wanted it to be a horror movie. Spielberg developed this film under the working title of Night Skies, but ultimately scrapped the idea in favor of the film he eventually released. Production on Night Skies progressed far enough, however, to come up with a few ideas for the lead alien's design. Spielberg worked with legendary SFX artist Rick Baker to invent some truly terrifying creatures for his sci-fi horror flick. And while it's fair to say that these aliens probably wouldn't have been welcome in the world of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Baker's ideas did influence the final design of E.T. himself, such as his glowing fingertips, large eyes, and extended neck. Spielberg then hired Ed Verreau to finish the job, giving the artist some help by pasting Albert Einstein and Carl Sandburg's eyes onto pictures of babies. Verreau took this brief and came up with several concept sketches of his own, eventually landing on E.T.'s final look. Kermit the Frog might well be one of the most charming characters in the history of film and television. Back in the day, though, he was actually kind of a jerk. Long before the other Muppets came along, Jim Henson was hired to produce TV ads for brands such as Wilkins Coffee, so he used his proto-Kermit puppet to help him out.
With this camera, I shoot pictures of people who don't drink Wilkins coffee. I'm ready. Shoot. Anybody else?
Most of Henson's early ads are just like that. Just Kermit committing bodily harm against another puppet. And that's not the only one that features Kermit going full Charles Bronson. Henson decided to mellow Kermit out a little as the years went on, which is probably a good thing, as it's hard to imagine this guy being so willing to put up with Miss Piggy's nonsense. It's not hyperbole to say that, if Toy Story had been released with its original characters and story, Pixar might not exist today. The original version of the movie imagined Woody as a sociopathic ventriloquist doll. Buzz Lightyear, meanwhile, was to be a more clean-cut 50s-looking astronaut in art created by William Joyce, although his design gradually moved closer to the one we recognize today. Years later, director John Lasseter recalled that he'd wanted the movie to be edgy and a little dark, but when he screened the first half of the film, he realized that he had made a monster.
It was a story filled with the most unhappy, mean people.
After that, Disney gave the team at Pixar just 2 weeks to make the story work. They succeeded, of course. Toy Story became an instant hit when it came out in 1995, and the rest, as they say, is history. Before she reached the screen in Disney's smash hit Frozen, Arundel's ice-powered Elsa went through quite the journey. Originally, Elsa was supposed to be a villain with a heart of ice, one who turned to evil after being stood up at the altar. This version hewed slightly closer to Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen, the story that inspired the film. Early concept art by Claire Keane gives Elsa a kind of Bette Midler look, while Megan Mullally was slated to voice her. Eventually, though, Disney decided to change course, and it's a good thing they did too, since Frozen became one of the studio's biggest ever movies. Sometimes, one small change to a character can make all the difference in the world. In Moana, Maui is voiced by Dwayne Johnson, and the original concept sketches for the character had him looking a little like his voice actor, albeit with a few more tattoos. A few aspects of this look made it into the finished film, such as the shark tooth necklace, but other than that, he looks almost like a wholly different character. His face is rounder, his expression is less friendly, and he's also completely bald. Ironically, Johnson will be playing Maui in the upcoming live-action remake of Moana, meaning he'll probably have to wear a wig in order to match the design of the animated version. WALL-E is one of the most expressive and evocative characters in the history of animation. Yet all that charm is conveyed not through words, but movement. This mostly comes down to his eyes, which evoke everything from amusement and love to terror and incredulity.
Even Wally.
Pixar characters often go through a number of alterations before production begins in earnest, and this was certainly true for Wally and his friends. In one drawing, Wally basically looks like a trash can with eyes. In others, he's lacking much of the expressiveness of the final design. Before long, the crew realized that his eyes were the key to bringing him to life, and the film's director, Andrew Stanton, worked for a long time to get them just right. The 2019 remake of The Lion King favored a more naturalistic approach to its character designs, but the same cannot be said for the 1994 classic on which it was based. This may not come as much of a surprise, since the original Lion King follows Disney's typical cartoon style of animation, but it wasn't actually always the case. During the design phase of the film, many options were considered for the characters, including a more realistic take on their appearance. Take Timon and Pumbaa, for example, who initially looked, well, just like a warthog and a meerkat.
They call me Mr. Pig!
Some of the original concepts were radically different to what we saw on the screen. One drawing of Pumbaa, for example, makes him look more like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh than anything else. As production progressed, though, these ideas were scrapped and the film's overall look became much less grounded in reality. The animators who brought Disney's Hercules to life modeled their artwork off ancient Greek illustrations, so the movie has a totally different look compared to the studio's other films. Of course, it still took some time to flesh everyone out, and it appears that Hades, the movie's villain, was one of the most difficult characters to finalize. The finished movie depicts the god of the underworld with blue skin and flames for hair. It wasn't always going to be that way, though. The Art of Hercules, the Chaos of Creation, reveals that Hades was initially conceived as a kind of effeminate version of the popular depiction of Satan. Another attempt at designing Hades utilized flaming hair, but made him look more like a stick figure, the kind of thing you might find on the side of a Grecian urn. Other unusual designs from the movie included a different appearance for Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guards the underworld, as well as other variations on the movie's mythological monsters. The dastardly Gaston is the main villain in Beauty and the Beast. He pursues Belle despite her complete lack of interest in him, and later attempts to kill the Beast in a fit of jealous rage. In the film, Gaston is a burly, outdoorsy, vainglorious man who cares for nothing but himself, and he sees Belle as a possession rather than a human being. Beauty and the Beast is based on an 18th century French fairy tale, and the story's place in history helped inspire the look of the characters. This was especially true for Gaston, who looked like a typical 18th century French aristocrat when artist Andreas Deja began developing the character. In a blog post, Deja later explained, "Gaston was already vain and full of himself, but not like the outdoorsy type from the final film. This guy lived the good life. He wore expensive clothes, had servants, and never worked a day in his life. He sort of looks like a young Marlon Brando." This look was abandoned during production, however, and the animators went with the Gaston we see in the final film, a much simpler, more rugged, and arguably more effective design. It seems like you can't make a Disney movie without going through a few redesigns, and this was very much the case with Aladdin. Obviously, the Genie is the most memorable character from this 1992 hit. In fact, you could probably argue that Robin Williams' performance is what made the movie so successful in the first place.
10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck!
And the Genie went through a heap of revisions before the movie's animators landed on a final design. The first designs for the Genie were created by Eric Goldberg, who joined the production in September 1990. His early efforts were quite different from the finished product. As he said in the Aladdin art book, "I designed him basically as a swirl of smoke with a nose and eyes." In another concept, the Genie is green and overweight, with no facial hair, a small ponytail, and a loincloth of some kind. These designs would have seemed right at home in an 80s Disney film, something like The Black Cauldron, for example, but they probably wouldn't have done Aladdin any favors. Then you've got this Genie, with his horns, feathered hat, Van Dyke-style beard, and clawed fingers. These are intriguing looks, sure, and it's interesting to imagine how they would have meshed with Williams' vocal performance, but the crew behind Aladdin clearly made the right choice when they landed on the Genie's final design. Let's be clear, Ursula from 1989's The Little Mermaid is one of the greatest Disney villains of all time. From the way her tentacles slither through the water to the purple-gray tone of her skin, Ursula is always unnerving but rarely outright terrifying, which is just the right balance to strike for a classic animated movie. This makes it all the stranger then that she originally looked like a lionfish.
Life's full of tough choices, isn't it?
In some concept drawings, Ursula looks like a busybody with a bad wig. In others, she looks like she's about to be cast in Real Housewives of the Sea. Though the film's animators tried out many variations on the lionfish-esque aesthetic, nothing seemed to work, until they turned her into an octopus instead. Throw in a few drag vibes, hire Pat Carroll to voice her, and there you have it, a true villain for the ages. As his studio's first ever feature-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was something of a gamble for Walt Disney. There was certainly no way to know if it would work or not, and the movie required a huge investment in time and resources. Yet Disney and his animators didn't create Snow White from thin air, as the story for the 1937 movie is adapted from the 1812 Brothers Grimm fairy tale, simply called Snow White. The original story gave the artists a template for what the characters might look like, but their early designs didn't work for Disney. Because Disney's animators didn't have much experience illustrating human women, those first concepts came out a little too cartoonish. With her large eyes and small features, Snow White looked more like E.C. Seeger's Olive Oil than the hero of a German fairy tale. Snow's hair was also a concern for Disney, as some of the early drawings featured red and blonde hair in a variety of styles. A more detailed depiction by Grim Natwick bore many of the characteristics seen in the final product, but Disney felt that she gave off too much of a provocative Betty Boop vibe. Eventually, the animators found the inspiration they needed, using the 14-year-old dancer and actor Marjorie Champion as a guide to develop Snow White's final look. Margaret Hamilton's version of the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz is one of the most famous villains of all time. Even before the emergence of Wicked, she was responsible for a marked increase in sales of green face paint around Halloween. Yet Oz author Frank L. Baum originally pictured the witch pretty differently.
I'm melting! Melting! Oh, what a world! What a world!
For one thing, she didn't have green skin. She was a squat older woman with 3 pigtails, a huge hat, and a skirt with moons and frogs on it. Basically, she looked more like a quirky middle school art teacher than the personification of wickedness. Baum also wrote that the witch had only one eye. Some illustrators portrayed this by having her wear an eye patch, while others gave her a cyclops-like eyeball in the middle of her forehead. The witch of the books never carried a broom either. Instead, she wielded an umbrella. Regardless of how far she strayed from Baum's original vision, the simple green skin, crooked nose, and black hat of the movie's Wicked Witch has become utterly iconic over the past century or so. And let's be honest, it's hard to imagine an umbrella-wielding old lady with a frog dress having quite the same impact. If the Wicked Witch of the West is one of cinema's most feared characters, then Dorothy is one of the most beloved. The Wizard of Oz has, of course, been a mainstay of popular culture since it helped usher in the age of Technicolor in 1939, and while there have been sequels, remakes, and a ton of adaptations, the power of Judy Garland's version is completely undeniable.
There's no place like home.
Dorothy boasts a simple yet iconic look in the movie, wearing a blue dress, white top, and braided pigtails held together with blue ribbons. The impact of Dorothy's design becomes all the more impressive when you learn how different she was supposed to look. Originally, she wore a blonde wig and was covered with heavy makeup, making her look far more glamorous than a young Kansas girl in the 1930s should appear. Yet that's exactly how Dorothy looked when shooting began on the film in 1938. When production stalled due to an onset injury and a casting change, Dorothy's look was reappraised. A new director, George Cukor, was brought in for the interim, and he decided Dorothy needed to look less like a movie star and more like a Kansas farm girl. Cukor tossed the blonde wig, removed much of the makeup, and let Garland's hair go au naturel. It's possible that the film would have done well without the change, but it's honestly hard to imagine Dorothy becoming such a popular character if she'd spent the movie all gussied up. Russ Cargill was the only original character created for 2007's The Simpsons movie, and the creative team didn't have an easy time finding a villain to fit in properly with the franchise's other characters. Originally, Cargill was an older, balding EPA agent with a penchant for sweaters. In this sense, he was a little closer to Gil from the TV show than the fast-talking government worker that appeared in the finished film. Very late in the animation process, however, the team changed him to better match the energy of the movie. In some ways, this last-minute switch came too late. The movie already had a Burger King tie-in ready to go, and they'd sent out their character designs before they realized Cargill would get a makeover, meaning that any kid who wanted a toy of the newest Simpsons character had to settle for the original design. Once upon a time, Arthur wasn't just a meme. He was the star of a series of children's books and a genuinely great PBS show. If you've ever wondered why Arthur the Aardvark doesn't look anything like an aardvark though, it's all because of author Mark Brown, who evolved Arthur's look over time. In 1976, Arthur actually did look more like an aardvark, complete with a long nose and a sad look in his eyes. As Brown later revealed in his blog, he gradually drew the character with a more human appearance, feeling that this would be more relatable to kids. Would the meme of Arthur's fist taken off if Arthur still looked like those original drawings? We'll never know. The Amazing World of Gumball is considered by many to be one of the best Cartoon Network shows of all time.
What are we gonna invent? I don't know. Does it matter if we achieve anything? I guess not. Look at pigeons. They don't get anything done. Yeah, what's the point of their life?
What's the point of our lives?
Fans and critics alike have lauded the show for its use of various animation styles mixed with live-action filming. Each frame is a work of art in itself, and all the characters are cute, expressive, and well-developed. One of the show's main characters, Richard Watterson, may not be the brightest bulb, but he's a loving father who works hard to care for his family. And he also happens to look like a pink rabbit. But this wasn't the original concept Ben Bocquelet developed for Richard when he was devising The Amazing World of Gumball. Bocquelet's original plan was for Richard to be a blue dog with a much thinner frame. In some sketches, he also wears glasses. The dog version of Richard has long, droopy ears and stubble akin to someone like Homer Simpson. All in all, there's very little about the dog character that resembles the finished Richard, outside of wearing a collared shirt and tie. It's unclear why Bocquelet abandoned this approach to the character, but it seems he made the right choice. As one fan posted on the show's fandom page, "I think if we had Richard as a blue dog, it would be a completely different character than we know him today." This one's a little different from the other character changes. For most of the 20th century, action films were dominated by leading men rather than women. And when it came time to develop the script for Alien, the original plan was to make Ripley a man too. Speaking to the Los Angeles Times, Ridley Scott explained that it was 20th Century Fox's then president who suggested they switch things up. He said, "I think the idea actually came from Alan Ladd Jr. I think it was Ladd who said, 'Why can't Ripley be a woman?' And there was a long pause that at the moment I never thought about it. I thought, why not? It's a fresh direction, and away we went." This was a good call on Ladd's part too. Alien was such a remarkable movie partly because its hero was a woman. Back in the 70s, it was rare to see female leads outside of romantic comedies and blaxploitation movies. Sci-fi had seen some progress. Star Wars had come out in 1977, for example. But for a strong, well-written female character to kick ass in a movie like Alien was pretty much unheard of.
This is Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.